So one of the important things in doing things and getting things done, improving the world, is that you have to be able to tell a story. Jeff started today talking about applying for grants. A big part of a successful grant application is being able to convey that story to the people who are awarding the grants. You have to be able to tell a story. You've got to be able to tell people why they should care about the thing that you're doing. So I've got a wide variety of storytellers up here. You've already seen most of them. Marilyn's got a podcast on everyday heroes, on caring. Christy, her job is telling stories. She convinces people to go to Nicaragua where they have scary boats and scary roads. Josiah is a lifelong journalist and storyteller and story seeker. He was in charge or a big part of the CNN Heroes project for a while. Never invited me, but I'm definitely over that. And we needed to find something else for Joe to do today, so he's on this panel as well. So Joe does a great job of telling stories online, especially I see, and particularly with the Gatto pups, getting that story started. So Josiah, I want to start with you on what does the structure of a story look like, and why is structure important?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I was going to sort of actually go a little bit of a different way with this. I think there's you can spend a lot of time studying the structure and sort of obsessing on that. And the company that I'm working for right now, we're actually making a feature-length documentary about a heroic woman who's taken heroic action. We are sort of studying the hero's sort of arc that you see sort of in a lot of great films. And there's a lot of resources you can draw on to do that, but you can also just watch a lot of great documentaries and sort of take notes about what they're doing. But what I think has actually been a lot more powerful in this sort of authentic storytelling that I've had a chance to do at CNN Heroes and then also in this documentary is to really just listen to the story that's happening in front of you. And I know that, like authenticity is a word that's been used a lot in the last 2 days, but it really does come down to authenticity. And when you're telling a story that's true, you don't really need to apply an external structure because the structure is there. And I think what's actually really more important is to sort of be able to create the space for that person to tell their story and create the space in your own head where you can really hear that story, where you're not bringing any of the presuppositions from the outside onto that story. So I'll just give a real quick example. The woman we're profiling in this documentary, which may be called Runway of Dreams, is a woman whose son has muscular dystrophy. She was an executive in the fashion business, and she realized there weren't clothes for her kid and people like that. And so she sort of went to war with the fashion industry and forced huge brands to make adaptive clothing, and she created this runway at big fashion weeks for people with disabilities. And the way we made this documentary is we have spent hundreds of hours sitting with her in her house, on the road, on airplanes next to her, just getting to know her and seeing how it is that she lives. And that's how the stories come together.
Brilliant. Marilyn, you do a lot of telling stories in the podcast, and I wonder how what Josiah just said applies to you when you're trying to figure out who to put on the show. Obviously, there's the recording of the interview and the show itself, but you do some pre-work as well. So what are you looking for in being able to tell a story?
Well, initially we're looking for someone that we call an everyday hero, which is just somebody who does something for the world. But in the story itself, there's a lot of difference between people who do things for the world and are very, very good people, solid people, people you'd love to know, and telling their story. The telling of the story has to sort of follow an arc. I think Zoe yesterday talked about Joseph Campbell's hero trajectory, and that's certainly one structure. There's Disney Pixar has a structure, and it goes just the way you'd expect a story to go, in a sense. Once upon a time, okay, so sets the scene. Once upon a time, there was a hero, or a protagonist, may not be a hero. And every day is the next element. So you fill in some of the details. You get to know the hero a little bit. And then one day, something changes. So the hero has to go into the world in a different way. Something new has to happen. And because of that, the next section of the story, where usually the crisis begins to develop, where the thing that's going to make the thing make it interesting, keep the audience on the edge of their chair, and because of that, you move toward the climax, and finally the denouement, the coming together. If it's a comedy, everything comes together and works out nicely. If it's a tragedy, it all falls apart.
Right. Christy, you've just presented a talk that was a story that you created very quickly through necessity. How did you go about turning a thing that happened into a story with lessons for an audience?
So I also write, and I write stories about the different travels I've gone on and different travels with students or participants. And so my approach is a little bit different. I don't think about the overall structure. I think about what is the takeaway that's going to be relevant to who's listening or to who's reading. So I could talk about travels and nobody cares, right? My mom maybe, but I have to talk about something that is going to land with somebody who's going to learn or gain or grow in some way. So I always start with what is it for my little puppy dog? What was it that I wanted to matter to everybody who's going to take on this story? And then I build out from there. What's going to get them to that point? What's going to engage with them, connect with them? And I kind of go from the center out in that way, and then comb through it and make sure the structure's sound. But how I did this story was actually I couldn't think of anything else. So it was really hard for me to get up here and be like, yay, elephants, but I was like, my dog. So I just tried to think about the theme, bravery, kindness, and how we use that to navigate lives, and just bring every slide, every part of that story back to that takeaway, and try not to cry.
I like how you co-opted Joe's family motto, be kind, be brave. You forgot the be Gatto at the end. And even had a pillow made, it looks like, before Joe's. Joe, in stand-up, which you do, you're obviously thinking about structure and delivering a line at the end. And how are you preparing for that? How are you thinking when you need to, the end? How are you building up to that? How are you making it so it's not rambling around, that it's not, you've got to be there to get that joke to land?
I always found that it's easier to think about it as if you were telling the story to a friend that knows you or a person that knows you already. And I think that's the easiest way to think about it, especially when you're presenting to people. I think the easiest way to think about it is, how would you tell this to your best buddy? And then you start from there. And then you're like, okay, this is what I want. And then you know what the outcome you want to be. And you just fill in the details on the front. And then you don't realize a lot of your stories are normally interconnected. So when I first started with stand-up, I tell a lot of stories. That's my thing. I had a crazy life with a lot of crazy things happening to me. I was like, oh, this will be funny to tell people. And then you realize that a lot of them just have a common theme. You just have to link it together. And then you can just get through it. But I think it's always, and it comes, and it speaks to the authenticity, there's truth in comedy. That's one of the mainstays, right? There's, that's the way it happens. If it's true, it's funny because people can relate to it. So that's a huge pillar of how I approach it. And I just think you just start by telling your friends, and then people want to hear it because you feel comfortable in telling the story. So tell it over and over and over again. That's like practicing with whatever you do. So you just told the story because it just happened. So I wonder next year if you tell the story, it'll be a little different, but it'll have the same takeaways. And no, and you took your breath, so I was proud of you. So I just think if you just act as if everybody cares about what you're talking about, you'll be a better storyteller. I think that's the easiest way to come about it.
And I think being a better storyteller, like everything in life, you have to do. You have to keep doing. And we've heard today already that failure is important. So you have to keep failing. And Christy, I think your habit of writing often just keeps improving your writing, right? If you look back, I'm sure a few years ago, you think, oh, gee, did I really write that? I'm deleting that post. But talk to us about how do you commit to doing that practice, especially when you're starting out with an audience. You've only got a couple of people, and some people in the audience might be thinking, I've got something that I want to make happen. I've got nothing so far, and I'm going to write 10 posts, and they're going to be the best I can do, but only 6 people are going to see them. How do you get to the 11th and the 100th?
Oh, you just keep going. It's consistency. I have to be pretty disciplined with writing. I try to write every day 3 pages, and sometimes it's just a lot of times it's a bunch of crap. I don't want to write right now. Where's my coffee? But then actually I find I do the morning pages, so every morning I write 3 pages, and the first 2 might just be scribbles, but the 3rd page I always find there's this breakthrough in my mindset about something. I have this aha moment, and that usually tends to be a punchline of a piece of writing I'm doing. I write every Friday, and yeah, you get actually really good at it. Every time you write something, you learn how to what words are throwaway, what words don't matter, and you learn to weed out the crap, and then just make sure that what you say is something important, and hopefully people open your email again the next week.
Josiah, the same thing. That journalism background, obviously there's repetition, and there's probably some stuff you wrote in the past, especially for some outlets that you'd prefer not to be seen again.
For sure.
But that practice, and especially I think in journalism with a deadline, and I think Christy enforces a deadline on herself to get that email out every week. What do you do when you don't have an official deadline, but you know you need to get stuff done? How are you giving yourself deadlines and make sure your work is done?
You're so right. I think my mom is a really good storyteller. She's never done it professionally, but she just, she could come up here and have everyone in stitches pretty quickly. She's just a mother of 8, so I think I got a little bit of that from her, thankfully. Maybe the only thing I got a little natural talent for my life. But you're right. In my journalism career, I was forced to write, especially in this digital era, sometimes like a dozen stories a day. And it's what I had to do to, feed myself. And so that was really, I'm not as disciplined as you by any means. So, necessity sort of helped me not perfect my craft, but grow. So I'm actually in a position now where I'm writing a lot less. And I do try to do the same thing as you. It's definitely not 3 pages a day. It might be 3 pages a week. But I sit down, and sometimes, I do it more in the form of journaling, but I just write about what's on my mind. And a lot of it is just, you mentioned getting rid of the crap. Yeah. The first half an hour is just releasing all of the noise in my brain. I'm going to talk about noise in the brain a little bit later in my speech, but we're just inundated with noise 24/7 now. And so the first 30 minutes are just releasing that. And really, I think people who write realize that that really is the process of writing. The stories are inside of each of us. And it's really just about digging and throwing stuff away until you get to what's really there. And I'm not a super emotional person, but when I do have emotions, they're usually brought on by myself alone in front of my desk. Writing, I'm able to dig and dig and dig and finally figure out, what's there. And I was just going to say one more thing. I think as far as imposing that discipline on yourself, there's just nothing stopping yourself from making a little audience at any moment right now. You could start an Instagram account that highlights heroic actions of people in your community. You could start that today and just write. People on Instagram aren't going to read more than 3 paragraphs anyway. So write 1 good paragraph, 2 good paragraphs. Say, hey, this person did this, or I learned this at the Hero Roundtable. And if you can write 1 good sentence, 1 good paragraph, you're well along your way.
Yeah, brilliant. And it is such a discipline. And I wrote and published a book, and there was so much pain when the editor said, get rid of that. And I was thinking about Jeff's talk earlier about that, 100 hours that was gone. It would have crushed me. I would have never written a grant again. But Jeff persevered, and he's done amazing things for his district. Joe, how do you keep that discipline up? You're on the road doing shows all the time, and you're still putting social media out all the time, that slice of life stuff. it would be so much easier to not do that.
Oh, it is, for sure. I mean,
So what do you do?
A lot of it is like, you have to think about what you want people to take away from, following you or whatever it is, right? So like, we were laughing out front with the content creators up top, and they were all taking their pictures, whatnot. And then I was just like, I should highlight how great these people are that are here and this event as much as I can. So I just turned on the camera and we did a thing, and I tagged them on my Instagram. And then it's just little things like that where you give people a peek into your life and you figure out what your audience wants, right? So I'll put up, I have like 3 different types of posts that I do in my story, right? I do all my comedy stand-up stuff and then all the self-promotion that comes with that. But then I do my family and I do dogs. And that's about it. And then you could like look on my feed and you see what people like and what they don't and whatnot. And it's crazy. Like I'll just have, there's no rhyme or reason to it, but just sometimes, I'll put up a thing about me just cuddling a dog and it'll get, 5,000 likes or whatever. And then I'll put a thing about teaching my son like how to ride a bike and it's got like, 50,000. And then you got like just where I'm just like eating a sandwich and it's like 150,000. I'm like, why? Why is me eating a sandwich more than this dog that needs to be saved? Like, what is going on? So now I make my dogs eat sandwiches and I've really figured out the whole algorithm. Yeah, that's it. But I do think, because like if you think about it, like the best thing about the Hero Roundtable, right? You guys are here to learn something about what you want to do. So what do you want to do, right? What is your story that you want to put out there? And then you figure out how to tell it. And what you're going to do is you're not going to know what's going to hit or what your story is going to be until you start telling stories. So the hardest part of any journey is the first step. Just start doing it. And then you'll figure out why you want people to listen to you, what you want to do, and then you'll get your traction and you'll get what you want to do. So I think that's a big part of it, is just to start telling stories, and then whoever wants to listen will, and you'll get better at it and your audience will grow.
Yeah, and I think if Jaheen had a big stick, he'd be beating me with it as regularly as possible to get content out, and something I'm terrible at, but I need to...
Yeah, we actually all want to talk to you about it real
quick.
I
know. You're going to stage an intervention later. Marilyn, talk us through your process of getting the podcast out, because I think one of the things I'll get onto after this is just how audiences expect quality now more than ever. It used to be that you could record on your computer's camera and put that out into the world, but people really expect good quality sound, good quality image. They want, YouTube's tracking how many people have left after the 17 seconds. What's your process like in getting a podcast together and out?
Well, I guess I'd use one word to describe it, and that's chaos. So I'm pretty new to this game. We only just started this year. It's not something that I've done professionally. It's not something I have a lot of experience in. So I'll talk about it, but with a caveat that don't necessarily think that this is anything you should be doing. So the first thing we do is we hear a story that we like. A story of somebody doing something that we think is worth talking about. And we get in touch with that person, and I interview them. And that's the beginning for us. Then we have a second part in the podcast where I invite someone, because I'm an academic, or I was an academic. I often invite an academic or an author or someone who has expertise on some element of that story. And we pull the element out and we try to feature it and talk about it. And the podcast is our target audience is helpers, so counselors, psychologists, coaches, community workers, teachers, people like that. And so we try to think of what would be interesting to that audience. What would they like to learn about in that heroic story? And so I contact that expert, I interview them, then someone with lots more expertise than me puts the whole thing together, edits it down, and turns it into a podcast. And that's the process, but as I say, I don't know if that's the right process.
It's hard to know whether anyone does know the right process, though, and I think organizations like Google that have YouTube and Facebook and Twitter X, their whole reason for existing is to make sure that nobody knows how to game the system, right? So anyone that tells you they're an expert at getting your video to #1 on YouTube is trying to make money off you. So I think that that barrier or that ship has sailed. So I think doing something and finding that audience, whether it's 2 people to start, whatever it might be. I think one of the interesting dichotomies, I think, is it's good advice to not make something for everyone. You should think about an audience. But I wonder how you go about creating that audience, thinking about that audience. And Christy, I'll start with you. Who are you aiming at, and how did you think who they were, and how did you decide to reach them?
Well, everything I was taught about finding your niche target market didn't ever work for me. My clients, my participants, they're between 15 years old and 72. They're male, they're female, they're married, they're single, they're divorced, they're from around the world. But the one thing they have in common is I think connection. My target audience who I write for are people who are seeking connection, lightness. I often write about things that go wrong because they're funny and they're honest and they have a positive twist to them too. So the people who read what I write or who come on my trips, they're looking for the real thing. They're looking for a human experience, a real experience, a positive experience, an inspirational experience, and you can't script that. I can try, but the best experiences I've ever run overseas or the best stories I've ever told have been the ones that I just spoke from the heart or wrote from the heart. And what do they tell you? Like 1% of people open your email, but I have 50% consistently. So, and they don't look the same, act the same, from the same place. But so just being honest, real, light, that's what works for me. So.
And predictable, I think, is a big part of why they open those emails. They know that they're coming each week.
Yeah, consistency.
Yeah. Another thing I'm terrible at.
But you're consistently terrible.
Consistently terrible, predictably terrible. I think Spencer will have an intervention with me later as well. So, Joe, what do? You've got an audience. Are you thinking about them particularly when you're delivering? But I might answer the question for you, but there's an authenticity there in you being you. You said that yesterday. How do you bring other people that aren't that typical audience into that story, that conversation?
Yeah, I think as you develop into different things, right? Because I had an audience built in when I was part of the TV show, right? And then when I moved on from that for a couple of years, I had to get people to come and say that I could be funny by myself, right? So they had to do that. And then when it started with the dogs, and it was like I'm becoming an advocate and in a real way for the dogs. So I had different audiences, and there's crossover for sure. But then there's new people that find me. Like I'll still meet people and be like, "Oh, you're a comedian," because they found me through the dogs, So it's kind of weird that way. But I think the way it 100% across the board is that you're just Joe. You're just who you are, and I think. People are going to like you for that or not like you for that. They're going to like you for what you're trying to do or not care about what you're going to try to do. So all you have to do is keep telling your story, and then when it falls to the right ears, you'll be able to get people to be part of your audience. It's not going to be for everybody. Some people are cat people. No judgment. I love cats too. Not as much as dogs, but I'm just saying. I think that there's definitely, as long as you are putting out what you think is right. So when I first started stand-up, I was like, all right, I have to put out something I'm proud of that I think is like, okay, this is funny and good, and I think it's a good reflection of me and myself, and I had to work to get to that. So once you're able to get to something you're proud of, I think being proud of your messaging 100% of the time will make you feel authentic and have people come back for more.
Yeah, great. Josiah, I think that that gap between looking for a target audience and making sure that the story's open to people from outside the audience is a tough balancing act, and I think CNN, I imagine, had very focused attempts to build audience, right? So they had the standard CNN people, but they're always wanting to bring more people in. So how do you balance that where you're trying to provide a story for a specific audience, but you don't want to exclude an audience?
I think CNN is sort of an unusual case in that it just has, it's one of the most powerful brands in the world. And, I think the advice we started off with, where you sort of need to imagine who you're talking to and what they're looking for, is what really matters most. And I think, the funny thing is, especially in the Trump era when I was at CNN, CNN sort of took a wrong turn. In that, what people were looking for, I think the question you should ask when you're making a social media brand or you're representing yourself on social media or any kind of media is, what are people coming to me for? And for many decades, people had been coming to CNN for news. And it was fairly straightforward, unbiased news. And in sort of the frenzy of the Trump era and just sort of digital media taking off, there was a lot of reward for going highly opinionated in one direction or the other. And there was just a lot of people were looking to hear noise that agreed with the noise in their own head. And that did work for a while. There were sort of record ratings. But the fatigue set in pretty quickly, and CNN damaged its brand pretty badly. And you're seeing the ramifications of that right now. It's shrinking quite rapidly. I think they peaked at $1 billion of profit while I was there, and then it's been a quick slide. And part of that is people who had been coming to them for straight news for decades stopped getting that. And it became a lot less trustworthy, and people didn't know what they were going to get when they came to CNN. Was it going to be news? Was it going to be opinion? Was it going to be dancing cat videos? And then just to bring that down to like a really micro level, my experience on social media, I had an Instagram that got a little popular for a while, and I did that by focusing it on something I love to do, surfing. And as long as it was like mixed, like my journalism and my friends or whatever, it went nowhere. But as soon as it was like 95% surfing, I reached about 10,000 followers, which isn't that impressive these days, but it was a little bigger back then. People knew they were coming to me for surfing content, and they knew exactly why they were following me, and they came to me for that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point that when you do pivot to something else, people have been coming to you for trusted. That's predictable. Like if Christy started writing about. I don't know. How to yeah. Her audience is going to disappear. And if Joe's not about cats, but he doesn't have anti-cat propaganda.
No, I don't.
But if he started...
I want to be very clear about that. I want to be very clear. Okay? Cats are okay. I just prefer a dog. All right? I have a cat in my house. There's a cat in my house. It hides in the guest room, but it lives there.
But you'd never know... If people like cats, they're not going to be excluded from your story.
Enough with the cats. We're not trying to be divisive. We're telling the story.
But if you pivoted to cats...
Not too late.
Okay, I'll get a cat. Do you have a cat that needs help?
So I think it's easy to follow trends, and if you are thinking about what story can I tell, what story do I have to tell, stick with it. And authenticity has been a big part of the last couple of days. You can't just follow whatever the trend is and say, right, I'm doing that now. You've got to build that audience one person at a time with the story that you're telling. Marilyn, how are you going about finding that audience and not, figuring out who you are, what people are coming for, and how do you make sure it's inclusive to anyone?
I don't know. Can I say I don't know, I don't know, I don't know?
Yes. Moving on.
I'm really experimenting with this and seeing what I can learn. I know a little bit from the work that I've done for a long time, which is a work of a psychotherapist. So I know that stories that have where you see the struggle of the person. So in Christy's story this morning, her struggle with making Rue better, and in Heather's story, her losses and her struggle to survive. Even in Jeff's story, that I lost the $2.4 million, right? So when we see a struggle, I think that, and we see someone come out of that struggle, that's important. But one of the things, honestly, I'm struggling with, and I haven't found my answer to this at this point, is stories are great because they have a beginning and a middle and an end. And the end is often a kind of a happily ever after kind of thing. But life is not like that. Life just goes on. And what happens after, and the reality of, well, we've talked about perseverance here a lot this morning. So I'm kind of thinking about, okay, I don't want to be manipulative with my stories. I want them to be real, but I also want an audience. And how do I walk that path with integrity? And I'm not sure.
It's so, because I grew up in the Sopranos era. I don't know if people know this, and that always makes me think of a great point about the Sopranos ending was a little divisive, because you don't really necessarily know how it ended. And one of the greatest argument points I've ever heard is you didn't meet Tony Soprano when he was born. So the part of the story that we're watching, it begins and it ends, and it doesn't have to end wherever. You didn't meet him when he was born. You met him at a certain point of his life, and you stopped knowing him at a certain point in his life. And I think that's a huge thing to remember, too. Like, you're showing people a portion of your life, and you're meeting some people right now for the first time ever that you just showed up on their feed. They have no idea who you are. They have no idea what you've done. And these are strangers to you that you're inviting in. So I think it's important to remember that your story is ongoing, and you can evolve and change as you see fit and as things happen to you in life. So good luck.
Can I also say that I think happy endings and sad endings are subjective? I mean, anybody could have seen that picture of my poor stitched up dog with 3 legs and thought that's a terrible ending. Or it's a beautiful, happy beginning of a new story, So sometimes if I'm telling stories that are sad or really, like I write about honest, fear harboring things, like cancer, death, all these things that are uncomfortable to talk about. But if you can bring them out in the open and at least talk about them in a way that people can connect, there's some kind of comfort or peace or happiness in that too. So I think maybe, I don't know, for me I try to broaden what I think the ending should be so that it's not just, okay, fairy tale ending. Like, life sucks sometimes and it's really hard and then it ends. And maybe there's something we can take from that we can share that brings hope to somebody else or light.
Try bad endings for a while.
Yeah.
Just horrible endings.
I think just to close, it can be pretty intimidating to think about what medium to tell your story in, and it can feel like you need to be on 5 social media platforms while you're writing a book and releasing a podcast. Can you talk about, Josiah, I think you've got that broad range of production of content there. What's your advice on that? Is it pick one? Is it figure out a couple? Is it try some and see what feels right for you? How would people in the room today think about where they could start?
I mean, I do think you need to, you shouldn't really be chasing the trends like we talked about earlier, because the story is always evolving, and what's working today is it's too late. You need to be on the breaking edge of things. I think you do need to find the audience where it is. So it depends on who you're trying to speak to. If you're trying to speak to Gen Z, you should probably be on TikTok, or maybe if you're looking for just a little older, like the young millennials, maybe Instagram Reels. If you're looking to talk to grandma or your mom, Facebook. So I don't think there's really a universal answer, and it also depends on the what's the famous line? The medium is the message. Is that it? Am I mangling that? It depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. This documentary we're making is going to be more than an hour, and we'll advertise it in snippets on TikTok and Instagram. But if you really want to feel the love and the struggle and what's really happening there, you need to sit your butt down in a movie theater like this and turn your phone off and open your heart to the story. So I think it depends on the audience and what it is you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it.
Any other, Christy, have you tried different mediums and left them, or you've got such a strong email presence? Has that always been the case, or did you flirt with other things? And
so I never want to, I don't know, there's certain people I connect with only on LinkedIn, and then obviously the Facebook crowd. So I don't know, I write the stories, and then they come out in the blog, and then I use Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook Business, Instagram Business. I did start a TikTok. I don't know what I'm doing. Everybody says it's okay. There's too much to keep up with. But I know there's certain faces that I only connect with on each medium. So I think, well, it takes 10 minutes just to repurpose. I don't think I'm seeing any growth, so I don't know. But I'm just going to keep at it because it doesn't take time, and who knows who you reach through one post. So, yeah.
Marilyn, can you talk about why you chose podcasts as a medium?
Well, I started on Instagram, and we were trying to just tell the hero story. We didn't have the expert opinion and commentary afterward. But our shortest stories were 12 and 15 minutes after they were edited, really the wrong medium. But I didn't know. So I started with like this group of very enthusiastic young volunteers who I'd given a workshop to on values, and I said I'd like to do this project, and they said we'll help. And I said what medium should it be on, and they were all about 20, and they said Instagram. I didn't know what I was doing, and honestly, like when I got someone who had a little bit of expertise in social media, look at what we were doing, and she said, "What are you trying to do?" And I said, I want to engage people in a conversation. I want them to think about their values. I want them to explore their own values more deeply and think about where they use them and how they use them and use them more intentionally. And she said, not on Instagram. Like, what are you doing? So we talked a lot. And then she came up with the idea, or she said, have you thought about a podcast? And I listened to podcasts. I hadn't thought about a podcast, but it is like one of my favorite podcasts is the typical podcast is like 2.5 hours, right? So yeah, that's a place you can have an in-depth conversation about things. So I think this is the right medium for me if social media is indeed the way to go.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully this has inspired you to tell your story, a story, some stories. Thank you so much to the panelists.